You're watching act.tv. I'm Julianna Forlano. As the United States finds itself in one of the most heated moments in our political history, we might not be as likely to pay attention to the political unrest that's happening around the world, but global struggles for democracy and justice are all interconnected and mutually reinforcing. And when we know how to support each other, we can fight together. Today, we're talking about how activists from Brazil are fighting the authoritarian tendencies of their president, Jair Bolsonaro. Joining us today, Breno Altman, a journalist and publisher of the Brazilian site Opera Mundi. He is dedicated to international affairs and national foreign affairs. Breno, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for your invitation, Julia. I'm ready to your questions about Brazil.
Okay, well, we've
been
following...
complicated country.
It is a very complicated country.
Yes, it is.
Can you give us an update on the political situation there? There's been growing dissatisfaction with Bolsonaro. How are Brazilians expressing that these days?
Well, Bolsonaro has been losing support in all polls during the last 4 months. There are daily protests. People beat pots in their windows and shout against the president. And although the pandemic, there are public rallies almost every Sunday. Bolsonaro still has around 30% in public support, but there is a huge insatisfaction against the way he has been leading with coronavirus, both as a health and an economic issue. He's against social isolation and has transferred money mainly to the banks, not to the working people, in order to keep them safe and fed at their homes. These are the reasons that he is losing public support. We have a real deep political crisis here in Brazil because Bolsonaro is not able to command the country in our most dramatic historical hour. I cannot listen to you, Julia.
Thank you. I had some slight technical difficulty on this end.
It happens.
So, where were we? Let's reconnect. And thanks for bearing with me. I said we were coming, via a satellite between here and Brazil. So I'm happy we can even do that.
Yes, I understand.
Talk about how the pandemic has changed the political situation there in Brazil. He's losing popularity, and now people are out in the streets. You're not having the same kind of anti-police violence uprisings that we're having here in the United States. What has made people, what was the tipping point for Brazilians to get them into the streets to protest?
I think we have the same kind of police violence here, but in Brazil, we don't have the same repercussion than in the United States, because somehow this police violence is naturalized here in our country. I mean, the media is not do not pay attention to this police violence, but we have a lot of police violence against public manifestations all the time, against the protests, against the rallies, because the military police in the states here are really very close to Bolsonaro. So this police apparatus is always in use against popular manifestations, against popular rallies, against protests here. We have a lot of protests. I mean, these protests are growing up because the pandemic here, we are in a very dramatic situation. We are talking about more than 1 million cases, more than almost 60,000 deaths. I mean, we are in a very dramatic situation, I repeat. So, I mean, these rallies, these protests are growing up step by step, fighting against police violence, fighting against Bolsonaro. That's one of the point, one of the issues of our political crisis because of coronavirus, because of pandemic, but also because of neoliberal politics adopted here since the coup d'etat against Dilma Rousseff. This kind of liberal reforms are being adopted here since 2016. We're talking about 5 years in neoliberal politics, which destroyed our health public system and destroyed even the capacity of the state to maintain social isolation politics against the pandemic.
Talk a little bit more about what the protesters are seeking to do. Are they wanting to oust him? Are they seeking social reforms? Or is it more like, we need masks, we need PPE in the hospital?
A melting pot. A melting pot to oust him, to defend social isolation politics, to defend social and economic reforms. But the main flag at this time is out Bolsonaro, to put him away, to oust him as soon as possible, and to call new presidential elections. This is the flag under which we have this protest, this release every Sunday, and we have this shouting in the windows. The shout in the window is "Fora Bolsonaro" in Portuguese. In English, it means "out Bolsonaro."
What effect does the fact that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, seems to be chummy with Bolsonaro? They seem to be pals and on the same page.
Yes. Well, Bolsonaro is the best friend forever of Trump. I mean, Bolsonaro has Trump as his main ally. And of course, if Trump loses elections next November in the United States, maybe the political situation for Bolsonaro is going to be very worse indeed, because in many ways, Bolsonaro depends on Trump, depends on his support to maintain Brazilian bourgeoisie united around him. Without Trump, I think that political situation for Bolsonaro is not going to be a very good scene.
Breno, talk about what is happening to the indigenous people in Brazil around both the deforestation of the rainforest and the coronavirus, and how those two things have come together at this moment.
It's a very dramatic situation. First of all, because Bolsonaro's government is against Black people, it's against indigenous people, is against LGBT community, is against human, is against any group which is out of his conservative, his reactionary point of view. And against indigenous people, we have Bolsonaro's attacks against the rainforest in Amazon, against the indigenous environment, and against the indigenous public health system, because Bolsonaro has cut budget to the indigenous people just before the pandemic. And the indigenous people is more vulnerable to the coronavirus than other people for many reasons. I mean, instead of putting more money to protect indigenous people, to reinforce their public health system, Bolsonaro has operated in the way, in another way, cutting budget to the indigenous people. So we have a tragedy. We have a real.
Doesn't this serve Bolsonaro's sort of mission of developing, which really means destroying the rainforest for developing it for commercial use? The indigenous community sort of stands in the way, or attempts to stand in the way of plowing down the rainforest.
That's it. I mean, he wants to eliminate indigenous people because they are kind of barrier to the developing model Bolsonaro and his supporters have in their head. I mean, they have to put away the indigenous people in order to colonize the rainforest, in order to reinforce the economical interests of the agribusiness.
Mm. Now that the economy is in all sorts of turmoil, not just in the US and Brazil, but the whole world's economy is in turmoil.
That's true.
Are the forces that would like to plow down the rainforest still very excited and desirous of plowing it down? Or are they seeing, a lack of demand for McDonald's hamburger meat? Don't they want, isn't it mostly cattle ranching that they want to do on the rainforest?
Yes. I mean, Brazil depends on cattle exportations. It's one of our main exportations. And this is the main reason for the destruction of rainforests, the expansion of cattle production. That's what we're talking about. And that's the main reason to attack indigenous people also, the indigenous people who live on the rainforest or around the rainforest in our country. The pandemic has not stopped this entrepreneur, these economical groups to going on this expansion. I mean, beside the human pandemic, we still have the rainforest destruction pandemic. At the same time, the rainforest is being destroyed in order to develop the cattle exploitation more and more.
Are people, I know there were people protesting that, trying to work against that. Are the forces who are doing that, they're still highly active under the COVID crisis, or have they kind of...
It's very difficult to protest under pandemic situation. It's not easy. People are afraid of dying because the public health situation in Brazil is dramatic. We're talking about one of the most serious situations in the world about the pandemic. So people are afraid of leaving their homes, are afraid to protest. So at this time, the rallies in defense of the rainforest, in defense of the indigenous people, we are still talking about vanguard rallies and protests. We don't have masses in the streets fighting against this destruction of the rainforest, or fighting against Bolsonaro, or fighting for social justice. But we are, step by step, we are walking in this direction. I'm sure that we are going that it's going to be here in Brazil in 1 month or two, some kind of social rebellion against Bolsonaro and his politics. I'm sure about that. Brazilian people is going to fight for their lives.
Absolutely. Is it the issue of unemployment leading to hunger, leading to people being in desperate situation? Can you paint us a picture of what it is that's happening in
I think that we are going to arrive in 1 month or two in something like 25% of open unemployment. Open unemployment. I'm not talking about people who are not looking for jobs because are at home. I'm talking about open unemployment around 25%. Among the young people who are under 25, we're talking about 50 or 60% of open unemployment. So we are talking about starving. We are talking about misery. We are talking about a social regression that we have never seen in Brazilian history.
And do you expect Jair Bolsonaro to respond with the brutality of military force?
I'm sure about that. I mean, if he's not able to have political support to try to isolate the protests, I think he's going to answer to this rallies, to this social rebellion with the military, police, or even with the army. I'm sure about that, but it's in our tradition. That's the tradition of the ruling classes in Brazil.
Well, same here, but they like to hide it a little better, pretend that they're not doing.
Yes.
Bolsonaro has come under fire.
You are very good in pretending.
Yeah, we are very good at pretending. Not anymore, though. Trump said, hey, let's call the military in on our own. At least he's right out in the open.
That's true. That's true.
You got to give him that.
Yeah.
I understand Bolsonaro has come under fire for his comments about the military recently. What is that about? And is there any evidence that some of the military may be turning on him?
There are more militaries in his government than during the military dictatorship in the 70s.
No.
The armed forces are the main political party in his government. They are leading the government. They are in the government. Somehow, Bolsonaro is a military government. Even he is a former captain in Brazilian army. We have a lot of generals. We have a lot of officials in key positions in his government. The military are the main force in his government.
That is quite frightening. I think
Yes, it is.
A lot of people here in the U.S. felt heartened by the fact that some of our military leaders really called out Trump when he said floated the idea of, calling out the military against our own people here in the U.S. and other former and current military leaders banded together and they said, I don't think that's a good idea, Don. But that wouldn't happen in Brazil. That's very frightening.
Yes, we in Brazil we have nowadays some kind of a military neo-fascism. That's, I think, what's happening here in Brazil. I don't think that we are already in a fascist political system, but we have a military neo-fascist government trying to build a new fascist system, political system, with the help of the armed forces.
Since a pandemic is a global issue, what is the response to Bolsonaro and Brazil been by the global and by the international community?
I don't think he pays attention in the international community about the pandemic. He's just doing political calculations. He's trying to put economics against public health because he knows that people are more afraid week after week, are more afraid about unemployment, about starving than about coronavirus. So he operates this situation in order to reinforce himself as president, as a political alternative for his re-election in 2022. He does not pay attention to the international community at all.
Have there been reports in the international community of countries other than the U.S. being concerned about the situation in Brazil and just like, would there be a potential for some sort of outside help or outside pressure that Bolsonaro might capitulate to?
Maybe, but at this time, we don't have a real international pressure against Bolsonaro. I mean, some international leaders, some institutions, some media criticize Bolsonaro, but there is not a real pressure against him. I mean,
well, we all have our own fascist leaders now, so we all got our hands full at this moment.
That's true. That's true.
What kind of information would you want people to know about what's happening in Brazil, other than what we've already covered? I want to make sure that the most important things get out to the audience.
The most important information is that Brazilian people is fighting and is going to fight even harder against fascism here in Brazil, against racism, against police violence, against Bolsonaro. That's the main information. Bolsonaro is the evil, but the Brazilian people is fighting against the evil. And is going to fight even harder and harder in the next weeks. I think that's the most important information to be covered up in the next weeks about Brazil.
We will keep an eye on what's happening there. Hopefully you'll be able to come back and keep us posted. And it seemed like earlier in the interview, one of the things people here in the US could do to help would be to vote Trump out of office. Is there anything else that activists in the US could
oust Trump to oust Bolsonaro? It's a good flag.
It's a twofer.
I mean, I don't like Biden. I don't think that Biden is going to be much different than Trump. But maybe to oust Bolsonaro, it would be a good path for us.
I think, yeah. Well, I think it would be definitely different in some areas. But yes, hopefully we can continue to fight against the areas in which he and his party have disappointed us, yes. Right, as activists.
Yeah, I understand.
You're watching act.tv. We've been speaking with Breno Altman. He is a journalist and the publisher of the Brazilian site Opera Mundi. Breno, where do people go to see the Opera Mundi? And is there an English translation version?
No, there is not English translation. Just some articles are translated to English.
Oh, that's good enough.
Almost all our articles are in Portuguese.
Yes. Well,
but our internet connection is operamundi.com.br.
Thank you so much, Breno. I appreciate you coming on and keeping us posted. And, you know, I'm in New York, so we were like one of the main pandemic centrals when the disease hit New York. So I can feel, we're kind of feeling a little more comfortable going out with our masks on and our hand sanitizer, but I can relate to the fear and the really just being inside, really stuck inside.
Anytime you invite me, I'll be here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Breno.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for your invitation. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You're watching act.tv. I'm Julianna Forlano. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We bring you progressive speakers, activists, journalists, politicians, if we can find them, every day, pretty much, here on our YouTube channel. You can find me at Julianna Forlano on Twitter, and you can follow act.tv on Facebook if you're not there already. And if you're watching on Facebook and you missed something and you want to see one of our other interviews, yesterday we had Joe Cirincione on. If you missed that, definitely go to our YouTube page and find that. But if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, share us with your friends. We're building our audience and we need your help. Thank you so much. If you're watching on Facebook, that's it for us here this week. I'm going to say goodbye right now. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want more, come over to Twitch because we're going to be hanging out in a more casual way there for the next hour. So that address is twitch.tv/act.tv. Have a great day, Facebook, and we will see you back here on Monday morning when we'll have a whole slew and week of progressive talkers. Thanks everybody for watching. I appreciate it.